maybe.
Leave it
I'm
to
staying
you.
up here.
You're staying up here.
Come sit by me.
Come back here. Come back here, please.
You know the funny story.
I can have him? All
Until
right.
after church.
I'll sit him right up there.
Got a helper there.
That's my helper. In case I forget what I'm saying, I'll ask him to finish. How's that? Let me see. We have this from the Salvation Army, and periodically we send them money to help in their feeding the poor and having camp services for people who can't afford it. And this one here has a little note from some lady or girl named Sarah, and it says, I am thankful for food. The food is so good. I am thankful for a bed. I am glad to do. Not have to sleep on the floor. I am thankful for the new friends. Love, Sarah. And then it says down here, friends, remember the fun you used to have going to camp, eating around a campfire, learning new sports and crafts and making new friends? Those were the good old days. You'd be saddened to see some of the kids who come to camp now. They've known violence, abuse, neglect at home. No wonder they are fearful and they're weary and unsure. It's a joy to see them leave camp with big smiles and happy hearts. They've discovered the great outdoors and they've learned what it means to be loved and cared for without fear. Now, suffering children are waiting to hear if they can attend summer camp. Would you be able to help them? We promise to continue doing the most good possible with your gifts. And then down here by Major Henry Morris, he said, repeating your gift will provide camp scholarships to children in need. Thank you. And then he's got that. And so I'll pass this on to our master treasurer over there. Okay. And then there is another one here that from the same Salvation Army. Oh, you got one of these too? Oh, they sent us two of them. All right. I'll keep these in for me.
I want one.
You want one? I'll give it to you afterward, okay?
I think he must got one too.
Now, how many, I meant to look it up.
What?
You know the page. How many of you have ever heard a sermon preached on the book of Ecclesiastes? Oh, you have. Did I preach it? No.
No.
I don't remember.
No, I don't remember. I don't remember preaching on it. But anyway,
I've never heard anybody preach.
what page is that, hon?
712.
Page 712. Now, I might not get to it, but we're going to talk about it. Okay? But before we get into Ecclesiastes, I want to just give you a little bit of background of Solomon. Now, Solomon, it's believed, wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. But he also wrote the book of Proverbs, and he also wrote the book, the Song of Solomon. Now, if you look at the book of Song of Solomon, it's all about love, and talks about the Shunammite woman and the king. Well, it's really a beautiful picture of Jesus and the church. But that first book was written about 1014 before Christ. That's 1014 BC. He wrote that book first, the Song of Solomon. The way it's put in the Bible here, it's behind his other book. But then he wrote Proverbs. And Proverbs is all about seeking wisdom and knowledge and truth. But when you get to Ecclesiastes, you might sound like it's a good book, but it's really under the sun that he talks about. It's a depressing book because later in life, that Solomon drifted away from the Lord. And so it's a lot of things in there, and you're going to see the word under the sun is repeated 29 times in 12 chapters. And then there's another phrase that
You
says
talking
vanity.
about S-U-N or S-O-N?
S-U-N.
S-U-N.
S-U-N, yeah. Vanity under the sun, S-U-N. And we're going to talk about the glory with the sun, S-O-N.
Is that where they talk about seasons? Everything there is a season?
Yeah, that's part of it.
So we
That's
probably
in
already
chapter,
heard it,
I
but
think
just to
that's
know
in
where it
chapter
was.
6 or 7.
Okay.
And you know, there are a couple of songs that the secular world sing about that, you know. And Ann called up one the other day on her phone and said, turn, 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 and there is a season
By the
for
birds,
everything.
if I'm not mistaken.
By the birds. I never heard of the birds, so she said, I said, it's for the birds. Well, they make it sound like la, la, very sweet, mellow, happy. But Solomon, when he's talking about it, he says it's frustration, you know, not joy, not happiness. And we're going to learn about that. But what I want to do, now, that word Ecclesiastes means to call an assembly. You know, here's Solomon. He's the king. He's one of the richest men in the world, one of the wisest men in the world. And so he's calling this assembly of people, and it's like he's giving instruction to them. And he's explaining, you know, the sun comes up, the sun goes down, the rain blows this way, and the waters go this way. And, you know, and there's a lot of knowledge in those verses if you stop and really contemplate what they mean. But I want to show you how Solomon came from a very wealthy background and how he slowly, you know, was drifting away from the Lord. Now, that word Ecclesiastes means to call an assembly or to bring together. And then vanity, it's not like we think of someone, he's a vain person always stuck on himself, you know. Not that type of vanity. The vanity here in the Greek means emptiness, you know, loneliness, worth nothing, grasping for feathers, as my wife would say, or blowing in the wind. You know, it's like there's nothing. All of my labor is no good, it counts for nothing. And that's the point here. That word vanity means nothing. It's worthless. And then under the sun, he says that under the sun, there's nothing that really benefits me. He said, because I was born, I lived, and I'm going to die. You know, and I heard a preacher the other day on TV, and he was talking about a situation. He says, you know, he says, I go to work, I get the money to buy the food, to give me energy, to go to work, to buy more money, to buy more food, so I can have the energy. You know, it just says, like you're on a treadmill. You know, it's like one of those gerbils inside of that little spinning wheel. Said, man, he's going 40 miles an hour, but he's not going anywhere. He's just spinning his wheels. And that's sort of what Solomon was trying to get across here. And now, here, I got the wrong book. Okay, I want to go back. You don't have to turn it. I'm going to read. So this is for all of the children in the class that I'm going to read to you today. Okay, and I'm going to read in Deuteronomy chapter 17. Just to give you a background of now, the nation Israel has come out of Egypt. Moses led them through the wilderness for 40 years, and then Moses can't go over into the promised land because he disobeyed God. He smote the rock instead of speaking to it. Now, don't think that Moses lost his salvation or anything, because he shows up with Jesus in the New Testament. on the Mount of Transfiguration. So we have to realize some of these people, even though they messed up, God still delivered them. Some messed up and they're wiped out. But the thing is that Moses had led them all the way up to the promised land, and Joshua was going to take them over. But Moses is saying to the people, he's saying that when you go over into this land and you're going to get weary of listening to God, he says, you're going to want to make yourself a king. And he says, I'm going to tell you some things don't let the king do. So we're going to talk about this. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 17, and I'm going to start with verse 14. When thou art come unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall possess it, and shall dwell in it, and you shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the other nations that are round about me. Thou shalt in no wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. What he's saying, he says, if you're going to have a king, make sure it's a Jewish king or a Hebrew king. He says, don't go get somebody from Syria. Don't go get somebody from Egypt. Don't get somebody from Babylon. You use the Jewish people from your own. And so then he says, I know you're going to go over there and do that. He says, but he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that they should multiply horses. He says, they're going to multiply horses and go back to Egypt. And the southern kingdom wanted Egypt to help them out when they were fighting against Assyria. So he says, and neither should he multiply wives to himself. And he says in verse 18, and it shall be when he sitteth upon his throne, that he should write a copy of this law in a book, so that he may have it before all of the priests and the Levites. Then he says, and it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of his law and of his statutes to do them. And it says, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandments to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. And what he's saying here is, don't multiply horses, don't multiply wives, and don't get riches and think that you're hot stuff, you know. And so if you would jump over to, and you don't have to do that, but in chapter 18, it talks about that the Lord, he says, the Lord your God will raise up unto you a prophet from the midst of you, of thy brethren, like unto me, him shall ye hearken to. Now this is a reference to the coming of the future king that's going to reign over all of the world, the Lord Jesus. He says that there's going to be a prophet that's coming. Well, they'd forgot all about that and they crucified him. So, but he's coming again. It's all in his plan. Now, I want to jump over here and read something else to you in 1 Kings, and this is in chapter 10, just so you'll get an idea of Solomon and the wealth. Now, David was not allowed to build the temple, but David gathered all the wood, all the gold, all the materials for Solomon to be able to build it. And the Lord said to Solomon he was going to give Solomon peace in his day so that he could build the temple. Now, when Solomon's there now and he's going to build this house, it took him 7 years to build the temple of the Lord. Okay, now you got 7 years. But it took him 13 years to build his own house. So you can imagine 13 years in building is a big house. Of course, they didn't have cranes and stuff to lift all the material up. They used manpower. But just listen to this and just picture in your mind how rich, how wealthy this man was. He says, now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 606 talents of gold. Now, a talent in those days was about 75 pounds.
Wow.
And he said 603 score. That's 666. The mark of the beast. But he had all that money coming in gold. And he said, and beside that, he had merchantmen and trafficked in spices and all kinds of jewelry. And King Solomon had 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into one target. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went into each shield, and he put them in the house of the forest that he made for himself in Lebanon. Moreover, the kings had a great throne of ivory overlaid with the best gold. And then I'm going to jump down here and some other things. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were silver. Get this. It was nothing counted for in the days of Solomon. And it says down here in verse 27, and the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as the stones. He said silver was so cheap you could throw it at people or you could throw it at animals. He said there was nothing of it. And then it says here, and this is about Solomon, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh. He married Pharaoh's daughter. And he says, women of the Moabites, of the Ammonites, of the Edomites, of the Zidonians, and the Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, you shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. And he had, get this, he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart, for it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God. And as was the heart of his father David. And then he says here, for Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, and after Malcolm, the administration of the Ammonites, the abomination of many. And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord as did his father David. And then in verse 8 it says, and likewise did he for all of his strange wives which burned incense, he built tabernacles for them in all of the high hills around. So here is Solomon. He's only the third king. It's because it was Saul reigned for 40 some years, David reigned for 40 some years, And then Solomon reigned for 40-some years. Now, when he was younger, he loved the Lord, because he'd give all of these different proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not unto your own understanding. And wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his ways, taking heed to your word, O Lord. And then he goes on and on and on about if you're going to seek anything, seek wisdom, seek knowledge, and how far he's fallen in a few years. And now, I'm going to go over to Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to start in verse 1, the very beginning, and then I'm going to jump to the end of the book, but that's not going to be all, okay? He says here in verse 1 and 2, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, or he says, emptiness of emptiness, that's the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? He's saying, everything I see and everything I do is vanity. He says, it's worthless. He said, because I can't take it with me. What good is it? And then back here, in the last two verses in chapter 12, he says this. But we're going to study this in the next couple of weeks, so this isn't the end of it. He says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Now, next week we're going to learn a lot more about this, but I wanted to just give you an idea here. Is in when they said they brought these 666 talents of gold. Now, a talent was worth 75 pounds. And they said in today's bookkeeping, with all of the things that were coming into Solomon, would be over $280 million a year. And then if you go back and read in 1 Kings, you're going to see how much food he had come in, how many horses he had coming in. Now these are just the thing. With Solomon, he had 4,000 stables for his horses. And he had 12,000 horsemen or soldiers. And it's unfathomable, that he could have that many chariots, stables, and stalls. So he was wealthy beyond means. But he said, what does it profit? And then here he said at the end of that book, he said, for God shall bring every work into judgment, and every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Then over here, see, they didn't have the knowledge that we have now, that we can look back, because they saw it as futile. They knew they were supposed to worship God, and they had the sacrificial system, but they didn't have the Holy Spirit dwelling in them. But God used the prophets and the priests to help lead them along. But here in the New Testament, we have the Word of God in the book of Colossians. And in the book of Colossians, it says this. Let me make sure I get the right verses that I want. I didn't write them down, but I know I got them right here. He says in verse 8, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, and you are complete in him, which is the head of all principalities and powers, in whom also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands, in putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. You were buried with him in baptism, wherein also you are risen with him through faith of the operation of God, who hath raised him from the dead, and you, being dead in your sins, and the uncircumcision of your flesh, hath he quickened, or made alive together with him, having forgiveness of all trespasses, blotting out all of the handwriting of ordinance which was upon you. Now, what he's saying, now Solomon says, I'm looking for something important here. Because later on we're going to see that he says, what does it benefit? He says, the rich man just like the poor man. We all die. He said, the foolish man is just like the wisdom king. He says, we all die the same way. He says, what is man different than the beast? He said, but then he says a little nugget in there. He says, where the spirit of man goes up and the spirit of the beast goes down. And so in the New Testament, here Solomon is looking for meaning. What can I do to enjoy this? He says, I've amassed all of this wealth out here, and it's all mine. But he says, I can't take it with me. And who knows, there might be a fool that's going to inherit it. And if you study the book, it's his son, Rehoboam, came to the kingdom after he died. And because Solomon had drifted away from God and had all these wives and started worshiping these other idols that were no gods, God said, I'm going to take the kingdom away from you. And he said to one of the prophets, go to Jehoiakim and tell him I'm going to make him king over 10 tribes. He says, I'm going to take the kingdom away from Solomon and give it to his son, Rehoboam. And so when Solomon found out that he was going to lose the kingdom, he tried to kill Jeroboam. And Jeroboam ran down to Egypt. And then when Solomon passed over his kingdom to Rehoboam his son, he collected all the older men and said, what should I do? These people are saying that my dad worked them too hard. And the older men said, yeah, he was a pretty hard taskmaster. He accumulated a lot of wealth. He said, take it easy on the people. And then he went back to the young men that he grew up with. He said, what do you think? He said, what should I do to these people, the other 10 tribes of the northern, it was all one kingdom then. And the young man said, tell him that your little finger is going to be thicker than your father's thigh, and you're going to burden them more. And he went back and he told that to the people, and Jeroboam rose up. And then he says, okay, we're going to fight against the southern kingdom. But God said that he was going to give Rehoboam one tribe, which is the tribe of Judah, so that he could keep his promise to David that someone from his line would sit on the throne forever. And in 1 week, the 10 tribes pulled out and there was war, and all the wealth that he had was gone. And so it says, it's not wealth that gets you anything. And it's not things that get you anything. He said, what you need and what Solomon was searching for was a right relationship with God. And that's what he's saying. As we go through here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see that the right relationship, if you're poor, and you're happy and you're loving the Lord, you are much better off than a rich person who, and he goes in here, he says, you know, the poor people, even though they're poor, they go out and they work and they just barely make it. He said when he goes home at night, he can rest his head. He did a good day's work and he can relax. But the rich man, when he goes home, he's got to make sure he set the alarm off on everything, the button so nobody breaks in and steals it. And he's wondering, man, suppose the market crashes and I lose everything. He says, you know, so the rich man many times has more frustrations and more, you know, fears than the man who has nothing. You know, and I say, well, I know when I was growing up, you know, ain't nobody gonna break into my house. There's nothing in there they would steal. You know, I mean, the only thing worth anything was the stuff in the refrigerator. So here, let's just cover a little bit of this. I want to go through a couple of these verses. In chapter 1, he says this. What profit, in verse 3, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he taketh under the sun? He said, all of my work down here is for nothing. But you know, that's what the New Testament says. Don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust and thieves break in and steal. He said, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. You know, so he said the reason that you get all of these things is so you have opportunity to distribute it to other people that they can benefit from your goodness. And then it says here, and this is where he's more or less routine, but these are deep thoughts right here. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh up, but the earth abideth forever. He says, you know, we got a group of people here, you're going to die and someone else is going to come along, they're going to die and someone else is going to come along. It's just like, and then he talks about creation here. He says, the sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to its place where it rose. The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about to the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. The rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place where whence the rivers come, thither they return again. All things are full of labor, man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Now, when he talks about the sun, we know that the sun doesn't come up and the sun doesn't go down. We know now because of the rotation of the earth. Now, this is not a science book. It's the ideas and the philosophy of a man, you know, who says, and he sees, you know, because they didn't have all the technical instruments we have of seeing. It's the earth that's rotating, not him. But then also he says there that the wind comes from the south. And then it turns and it comes from the north. And then it turns and it comes this way. And you know, the way that the winds go, we can see that every day on our television sets. You know how this high pressure comes and this low pressure comes and there's a cold blast. And we can learn all about the jet streams. Well, here he understood some of these things, but he didn't know how and why they operated. And so, and also the thing with the rivers running to the oceans, and the oceans are not filled up. And he says, and then it rises. He didn't know anything about evaporation, but somehow he knew that the water went up and brought rain and they came down. He didn't know how it went up, but he could talk about evaporation. So a lot of these things we haven't learned about until about the 13th century. And then he says here in verse 8, all things are full of labor, man cannot utter it, the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. You know, there's several steps of that. He says that when I see something, I can long for that and wish I had it, you know. And then when I get that, well, I see something different. Remember the old time when we had the big records like this, and you put them on the Victrola over here, and you play them. And then later on, they came out with the little tiny ones. I forget what they're called now. It's been too long. We're going to learn about that too, forgetting stuff.
45.
45, yeah. She's not that old. The 45. And then they came out with the cassettes, you know. And oh, cassette. Then they came out with the 8-tracks, you know. 8-tracks, you know. And whoa, I'm really stepping up in the world. And then they come out with the CDs or the discs. You say, oh, I got to have that one. You know, it's, and I remember when I was a kid, my father was smarter than I thought he was. It's because he told me, I told him I wanted a bicycle one time. He said, I'm really glad you want it. And I said, why? I said, you going to buy it? He said, no. He says, as long as you got something to want for, you got something to live for. You know, he says, 'cause if I buy you that bike, then you're going to want a car. He says, and then if I buy you a car, then you might want an airplane. He says, so you keep on wanting and keep on working. You know, it's nothing's going to come to you easy. And so when I was 14 years old, I was working in a cement factory, lifting big cement blocks up, and I was making 50 cents a day, you know. But I made enough to go to the movies, you know. That was the important thing. And so we're going to stop there because the time's leaving. But we're going to pick it up next week there at verse 9 of chapter 1. And hopefully I'll get through about 3 or 4 chapters. So read through if you can. If you can't, just do a couple of them. And I thank you very much for my birthday present. Huh? That's not my birthday. Oh, you got a bear. Oh, that's bigger than a rabbit. Ooh. All righty. Let's stand and pray.